Star Citizen has this weird relationship with perfection. It's simultaneously the most ambitious space sim ever conceived, and the game that can't figure out how to make an elevator work properly. When Benoit Beaujeu, the guy who's technically responsible for every single crash, bug, and that's not supposed to happen, moment you've experienced, decided to talk for nearly 3 hours without a script. Well, let's just say he didn't hold back, and what he revealed changes everything about how we should think about this game's development. You've probably had that moment. You know the one. You're finally getting somewhere in Star Citizen. Maybe you've just earned enough credits for that ship you've been eyeing, or you've successfully completed a challenging mission chain without the server kicking you out. Then boom, patch day arrives and suddenly half your stuff is gone, the thing that was working yesterday is broken, and you're left wondering if the developers actually play their own game. Well, turns out they do play it, they do know about these problems, and they've been quietly rebuilding their entire development process from the ground up. The catch? Most of what they're fixing happens behind the scenes, which means you might not even notice the improvements until you realize you haven't rage quit in weeks. This wasn't your typical developer interview where everything gets filtered through marketing speak. Benoit laid out what CIG calls their year of playability, basically admitting they spent a decade building features on top of a foundation that was, let's be diplomatic and call it problematic. Think of it like this. Imagine you've been adding floors to a house for 10 years, but the basement has been flooding the whole time. Eventually, you have to stop building up and start fixing down. That's what happened here. They've completely restructured how they write code, test features, and measure whether the game actually works. The part most players miss is that this required pulling people off new feature development, which explains why some promised content has been delayed. But here's the thing, they had to make a choice between giving you new broken toys or fixing the toys you already have. Here's something that never makes it into the patch notes. CIG basically admitted their developers couldn't be trusted to ship working code. That sounds harsh, but Benoit was refreshingly blunt about it. They've implemented something called embedded Greenlight, where QA specialists are now embedded directly in development teams, with the power to stop any code from being submitted. Before this change, the process was essentially ship it fast, fix it later, which explains why you'd get patches that fixed quantum travel, but somehow broke the ability to exit your ship. The old system was like having a restaurant where the chef could send out any dish without the kitchen manager tasting it first. Now every single change gets vetted by someone whose job is to catch problems before they reach your game client. This is why recent patches feel more stable even when they're adding new content. Think about your last few play sessions. When was the last time you got a 30K error? If you can't remember, that's not luck. That's the result of these changes working. But you've probably noticed other things. Maybe your ship doesn't randomly lose power during quantum jumps anymore, or perhaps those freight elevators at mining stations actually work most of the time now. The question is whether you've been attributing these improvements to luck or actually recognizing them as systematic fixes. Server performance has jumped from what Benoit described as 4 to 5 frames per second if you're lucky, to consistently above 20 frames per second. But here's what makes this achievement remarkable. They did it while increasing player capacity from 100 to 600 plus players per shard. That's like making a highway run smoother while adding 5 more lanes of traffic. The technical explanation involves server meshing, distributing the computational load across multiple servers. But the practical result is that your ship actually responds when you press buttons. Remember those moments when you try to open a door and nothing would happen for 10 seconds? Or when your ship's landing gear would deploy sometime next Tuesday? That lag wasn't your internet connection. It was the server struggling to process basic interactions. Static server meshing fixed this by giving different servers responsibility for different areas of space. So when you're at Area 18, you're not competing for processing power with someone mining in the Aaron Belt. Picture this scenario. You've spent 3 hours gathering rare minerals for a Wicklow contract. You've got everything loaded onto the freight elevator at some remote outpost. You hit the button, and nothing. The elevator just sits there like it's contemplating the meaning of existence. You try everything, relogging, claiming your ship, even sweet-talking the elevator panel. Eventually you give up, losing hours of work and all those materials. What Benoit revealed is that this could happen because someone left a medical pen on the elevator platform. Not visible to you, but the game thinks there's an obstruction. Even worse, sometimes destroyed items would leave invisible entities that the elevator system couldn't clear. The frustrating part wasn't just losing your stuff, it was the complete randomness of it. You could do the exact same process 10 times, and it would work 9 times, fail once, and you'd never know why. The biggest revelation concerns how your stuff disappears between patches. Most players assume it's just alpha schnunk, but Benoit broke down the actual technical reasons, and they're more complex than anyone realized. When you buy a ship with real money, it lives in a web-based database that's completely separate from the game world. Every time you log in, the game asks that database, what does this person own? It gives you those items. That system works perfectly. You never lose pledge ships. but everything you earn in-game uses a completely different system called long-term persistence, which only creates records when you properly stow items in specific ways. Leave your ship at a landing pad instead of storing it in a hangar? No LTP record. Get your ship destroyed but forget to claim it before the next patch? No LTP record. The system was designed when Star Citizen was much simpler, and it can't handle the complexity of the current game. The solution they're building will treat earned ships exactly like purchased ships, creating permanent entitlement records that survive patches regardless of where you left your stuff. Anyone who spends time on Spectrum has seen the endless debates about whether CIG is actually fixing anything or just breaking new things. What's fascinating is how Benoit acknowledged this perception, while providing hard data showing dramatic improvements in stability scores and session length. The disconnect happens because the most visible improvements, like server performance, aren't things you directly notice until they're working. It's like having good brakes on your car. You don't think about them until they fail. Meanwhile, the problems that remain, like freight elevators occasionally eating your cargo, are highly visible and memorable. The community tends to remember the one time something broke more than the 10 times it worked correctly. This creates a perception gap where real improvements get overshadowed by remaining issues. Until these new systems go live, you can protect yourself by understanding how the current system actually works. When you store a ship in a hangar, you're not just putting it away, you're triggering the creation of an LTP record that will survive patch wipes. This means always flying back to a station with hangars before logging off, even if it's inconvenient. If your ship gets destroyed, don't just leave it on the insurance claim screen. Actually claim it to create that LTP record. For valuable items and components, store them in your home location's inventory rather than keeping them on ships or in temporary storage. The system treats different storage locations differently, and your personal inventory at your home base is the most reliable. Also, pay attention to tech preview announcements. Benoit confirmed that engineering gameplay is finally coming to testing, possibly before year's end, which means those engineering components you've been collecting might actually become useful soon. This 3-hour conversation covered territory that CIG has never discussed publicly before, from internal stability scoring systems to why certain bugs keep returning after being fixed. The level of technical honesty was unprecedented, especially Benoit's admission that some systems are so problematic, they're just accepting the current state while building complete replacements. What's your biggest frustration with Star Citizen's technical issues right now? Are you dealing with disappearing cargo, unreliable elevators, or something else entirely? Drop a comment with your specific problem, because understanding these systems helps predict which issues are likely to be resolved soon versus which ones require the longer-term fixes they're building. And thanks for sticking with this deep dive into the technical reality behind Star Citizen's development. Next week, we'll be covering everything that gets announced at CitizenCon Direct on October 11th, though Benoit confirmed there won't be any Squadron 42 content, as that team stays focused on their 2026 target. The transparency in this tech talk suggests CIG is becoming more comfortable discussing their development challenges openly, which benefits everyone who's invested in this project's success. Understanding what's actually broken versus what's working helps set realistic expectations, while we wait for these foundational improvements to fully materialize.